The first letter arrived folded neat in a white HOA envelope, but when I tore it open my blood ran hot. Bold at the top, violation unauthorized hunting. Below, a demand for $500, citing noise complaints, safety risks, and illegal use of community property. I stared at the page, jaw locked, because what they called community property was the very same forest my grandfather had deeded to me decades before the HOA even existed. My family had hunted there for generations. Every deer stand, every trail carved through the pines had been marked and maintained by our hands. Yet here was Karen, president, tyrant, queen in a stretched floral blouse, deciding she owned it now. I marched to the HOA office with the letter crumpled in my fist. Karen sat behind a fake mahogany desk, sunglasses perched even indoors, her mouth twisted in a smug smile. "Well?" she purred, tapping her acrylic nails. "Here to pay." I slapped the letter on her desk, voice trembling with anger. "That land is mine. I've hunted there since I was 12. My deed covers every acre of those woods." She chuckled, a condescending sound that scraped my ears. "Not anymore. The HOA voted to designate it as community hiking trails. Your little guns and blood sport are banned. Pay the fine or face liens on your property." The words hit harder than a rifle's recoil. For a moment I thought she was bluffing, but the arrogance in her tone told me she believed every syllable. Her so-called security, 2 men in neon vests, stood at the door smirking like they'd back her no matter what. I walked out shaking, but in my gut I knew the fight had just begun. That night, I dug through my grandfather's lockbox. Yellowed papers spread across my table. There it was, a land patent, signed in ink nearly a century old, granting my family ownership of not just the forest but the trails, streams, and hunting rights in perpetuity. A second document made my breath catch. It was a conservation easement filed 40 years ago, one that clearly outlined private stewardship of the land, forbidding commercial development without the owner's consent. That meant not only did I own it, but the HOA had no right to designate it as community trails. At the next HOA meeting, Karen paraded her authority like a crown. She read out fines, violations, threats, each word dripping with smugness. When she got to my name, she smirked. "Mr. Vance refuses to comply. Therefore, further penalties will be assessed." Gasps and whispers filled the room. I stood, deed in one hand, easement in the other. My voice cut through the noise. "This fine is illegal. This land is mine. And if you trespass again, you'll answer in court." I read every line aloud, my heart pounding as the neighbors leaned in. "Perpetual rights," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "Your board doesn't override the law." Karen's face flushed crimson. She slammed her gavel, shrieking, "Forgery! Lies! Sit down." But then a twist I hadn't expected. Lydia, my quiet neighbor who ran the county records office, rose from the back row. She held up her own folder, her voice steady. "He's telling the truth. I verified the documents myself this morning. That land has never been under HOA jurisdiction. The board's claim is fraudulent." The room erupted. Half the crowd turned on Karen, shouting questions, demanding answers. The other half sat stunned, finally realizing the emperor had no clothes. Karen screamed over the noise, threatening to fine anyone who questioned her. But her voice shook now, her certainty slipping like mud in a storm. I thought that would be enough. But the very next week, I found trail markers nailed into my tree's bright orange blazes marked HOA hiking path. They'd trespassed anyway. And worse, I found boot prints leading to one of my deer stands, the ladder sawed halfway through. If I'd climbed it, I could have been killed. That was no fine. That was sabotage. I called the sheriff, who took photos and shook his head. "This isn't just trespassing," he muttered. "This is reckless endangerment." He promised an investigation, but I knew Karen wouldn't stop until someone stopped her. So I did. With Miguel, my oldest friend, and a handful of neighbors who'd grown sick of Karen's tyranny, we set out to reclaim the trails. We documented every illegal marker, every fence she tried to erect, every false notice posted. Lydia pulled county survey records proving my boundaries. Miguel flew his drone overhead, filming the extent of their vandalism. We built a case piece by piece, until the pile of evidence was as tall as my hunting blind. The final confrontation came one humid Saturday when Karen led a community hike through my woods. 50 people following her like sheep, HOA flags waving. They reached a clearing only to find us waiting, Miguel, Lydia, the sheriff, and half the county watching. The sheriff stepped forward, badge glinting in the sun. "This is private property. You are trespassing under false authority." Karen tried to bluster, shouting about bylaws and community rights. But then Lydia held up the official map, stamped and sealed. "This land belongs to the Vance family. It always has. And your attempt to seize it is a crime." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some hikers turned back immediately, realizing they'd been duped. Others glared at Karen, angry they'd been dragged into her stunt. Her face twisted, her voice shrieking to the treeline. "Don't listen. It's all lies. I am the president." But no one followed. That night, the lawsuit landed. Trespass, fraud, attempted sabotage. With the evidence Lydia and Miguel had gathered, the court didn't just side with my transferred all disputed trail easements back under my sole ownership. And in the ruling's fine print, a clause stood out. The HOA was permanently barred from accessing, maintaining, or designating the land in any capacity. When the verdict hit, I walked the trails with fresh boards and iron chains, sealing every entrance. New signs went up, private property trails closed by order of the court. The same people who had mocked my hunting now stared at locked gates. Their summer hikes gone, their picnics vanished. Karen had promised them access, but her arrogance had cost them everything. And Karen herself? She didn't just lose the case, she lost her throne. The audit revealed she'd funneled HOA dues into personal vacations, paying her nephew for trail maintenance that never happened. She was indicted, booked, and paraded out in handcuffs while the cameras rolled. Her floral blouse, once her uniform of power, was now soaked in sweat and humiliation. As for me, I hunt in peace again. The forest is quiet, the deer stand rebuilt, the barn safe. Sometimes I hear hikers at the locked gates grumbling about the trails they lost. But I remind them, it was never theirs to begin with. The court ruling hit like a hammer not only on Karen but on the entire HOA. I watched her face drain when the judge said the words, permanent injunction, and complete transfer of rights. For a woman who had strutted around as if bylaws were carved into stone by God himself, the realization that her entire board's authority stopped dead at the tree line broke her in ways I'd never seen. She sputtered objections, called the judge corrupt, even tried to storm out of the courtroom before deputies blocked her path. The gavel came down, and with it, her empire fell apart. But outside, the story didn't end. The neighborhood was split in two. On one side were those who clung to her lies, furious that their community trails had been sealed. They left angry comments online, muttered about conspiracies in grocery store aisles, and whispered that I had cheated the system. On the other side were neighbors who had lived under Karen's fist for too long, finally breathing free. For every angry hiker at the gate, 3 families came to shake my hand, thanking me for standing tall when no one else dared. The HOA board fractured almost overnight. Without Karen's iron grip, meetings descended into chaos. Resignations piled up as the audit reports poured in. It turned out the trail fund she had used to justify the fine against me was nothing but a slush account, paying for spa trips and catered luncheons. The so-called safety patrol she hired were her relatives, cashing checks for work they never did. The scandal burned through the board like wildfire, and soon the entire HOA was disbanded by county order. But Karen still tried to claw back her power. Even as she awaited sentencing on fraud charges, she sent letters from jail, rants written in her jagged handwriting, claiming she'd been betrayed, that I was a thief, that Lydia and Miguel were part of some grand conspiracy. Some of the letters were mailed directly to my house, scrawled with threats like, "The trails will open again," and "You can't hide behind paper forever." At first, they made my stomach twist, but after a while, they just felt pitiful, like the last gasps of a drowning woman. The twist came when the governor himself paid a visit to the county. Wildfires had threatened nearby towns, and my land, those same trails, were marked on emergency maps as potential access routes for firefighters. The governor asked to meet me, standing in the shadow of my grandfather's forest, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "We want to use your land for staging," he said, "but only with your blessing. No one can force you." His tone carried weight, but also respect the very thing Karen had never given. I thought long and hard, staring at the trees I had grown up under, the stands my father had built, the memories carved into bark and soil. Then I nodded. "They're yours," I told him, "but only for the crews who fight to protect us. Not for picnics, not for weekend hikers. For men and women who understand what it means to respect the land." His smile told me I'd made the right choice. For the first time, those trails would serve something greater than my family or the HOA they'd serve survival. When the fire season passed and the danger faded, I sealed the gates again. Iron locks, steel chains, fresh signs, closed private property. Some neighbors grumbled, others sighed in relief. The truth was simple. The trails were safe now, not because they belonged to everyone, but because they were protected from those who thought ownership meant entitlement. And Karen? Her downfall was brutal and public. At sentencing, she tried once more to play queen, addressing the court with a tirade about injustice and conspiracies. But the judge silenced her with a glare and handed down years behind bars, plus restitution she could never repay. Cameras caught her being led out in shackles, her floral blouse wilted, her sunglasses nowhere to hide behind. The footage aired that night. Neighbors gathered around TVs shaking their heads, some cheering, some weeping with relief. In the weeks that followed, something changed in our community. Without Karen's chokehold, we started to breathe differently. Families hosted cookouts without fear of fines. Kids rode bikes down streets once patrolled by HOA security. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years found themselves laughing together again. It wasn't perfect, scars remained, but it was ours, finally free of tyranny. For me, the victory wasn't in Karen's sentencing, though seeing her empire crumble was sweet. It was in standing at the trailhead with my rifle slung over my shoulder, the iron gate locked behind me, and knowing I had honored my grandfather's legacy. The land he had passed down wasn't just trees and dirt. It was a lesson that sometimes the fight isn't about what you can take, but what you refuse to surrender. And when autumn came, I hunted in silence, the forest alive with the sound of leaves falling, the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of deer moving through brush. No voices shouting fines, no paper notices nailed to trees. Just peace. Now I ask you, reader, was I right to close the trails forever, to shut the gates so no one could ever misuse them again? Or should I have reopened them in good faith for neighbors who weren't to blame for Karen's arrogance? Where would you draw the line between forgiveness and protection?